Pick a number, any real number from the world around you. The price on a receipt, the people in a city, the money in your bank account. Now just look at its very first digit. You'd figure that first digit is basically a coin toss. 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 9, each showing up about the same. It isn't. Not even close. Grab millions of real numbers and line them up, and the digit 1 hogs that front spot about a third of the time. 9 barely shows up at all. There's a hidden rule tucked inside almost every number we use, and it's so stubborn, so reliable, that fraud investigators use it to catch people cooking their books. It's called Benford's Law. Most people have never heard of it. And here's the fun part. The second someone sits down to fake a bunch of numbers, they break this rule without even knowing it's there. So we're going to figure out why the number 1 is so greedy, and why a faker never sees it coming. Look, your gut says this has to be wrong. If you pull a real number out of the world and look at its first digit, surely it's a fair race. 9 possible digits, 1 through 9, so each should win about 1 time in 9. That's a little over 11% each. Clean, obvious, almost insulting to question. And if someone offered you a bet, even money, that the next real number you stumble on starts with a 1, you'd take it without blinking. You'd feel robbed. But you'd lose, and you'd lose badly, because a 1 turns up nearly 3 times as often as it should. And that gap between what feels obvious and what's actually true is the whole story. The strange part isn't that the pattern exists. It's that it's been hiding in plain sight, in numbers you've looked at your entire life, and your brain smoothed right over it. The first person to catch it was an astronomer named Simon Newcomb, back in 1881. There were no computers, so to multiply big numbers, everyone used thick books of logarithm tables, page after page of digits. And Newcomb noticed something strange about his copy. The early pages, the ones for numbers starting with 1, were filthy, smudged, worn soft, nearly falling out. The later pages, for numbers starting with 8 or 9, looked almost brand new. People were reaching for numbers that begin with 1 far more often than numbers that begin with 9. The wear on the paper was a quiet little map of how often each number actually came up. Newcomb even scribbled down roughly the right rule. But he had no idea why it happened, so nobody paid much attention, and the whole thing sat forgotten for more than 50 years. Then, in 1938, a physicist at General Electric named Frank Benford got obsessed with those same worn pages. And he did the grinding work Newcomb never bothered with. He collected numbers from everywhere he could reach: the surface areas of rivers, the populations of towns, molecular weights, baseball statistics, street addresses pulled out of a magazine. More than 20,000 numbers from 20 completely unrelated sources, and every single pile bent the same way. About 30% 1s, sliding down to under 5% 9s. That's when the real twist lands. This was never about rivers, or money, or molecules. What the numbers counted didn't matter at all. Something deeper was going on underneath all of it, and it had nothing to do with the subject. It had to do with how numbers grow. So picture how a real quantity grows. Not by adding 1 at a time, but by multiplying. A town of 1,000 people doesn't tick up to 1,001 overnight. It grows by percentages, so it drifts to 2,000, then 5,000, then 10,000. Now watch the first digit on that whole trip. To climb from 1,000 to 2,000, the town has to double in size. That's a long, slow haul, and the entire way up, the leading digit is stuck on 1. But to go from 9,000 to 10,000, it only has to grow about 11%, and the leading digit is 9 for barely a breath before it rolls over into 1 again. Getting off of 1 is hard. Getting off of 9 is easy, so anything that grows by multiplying spends most of its life wearing a small first digit. Space a ruler out by that same logic, the way a slide rule squeezes its marks together. The slot for numbers starting with 1 becomes the widest stretch on the whole ruler. 9 gets a sliver. The numbers just settle into the room that's actually there. But before you go testing this on everything you own, here's where it falls apart. And this part matters. Benford's law is not a law of physics. It's a strong tendency, and it only shows up when your numbers stretch across many different sizes, prices from a few dollars up to a few million. That's when it bites hardest. Feed it numbers that are all boxed into a narrow range, and it just collapses. Adult heights, measured in centimeters, almost all start with a 1 or a 2, so the pattern's simply gone. Phone numbers, which a person assigned on purpose, ignore it completely. So do zip codes and lottery draws and anything truly random with a fixed ceiling. So it isn't magic, and anyone who tells you it always holds is overselling it. It's a fingerprint that only shows up on a certain kind of number, the natural, sprawling, multiplied up kind. Which brings us right back to the liar with the spreadsheet. Because a person faking numbers does the one thing real data almost never does. They spread the digits out to look random, roughly as many ones as 5s as 9s. It feels honest. It looks unbiased. And it's the exact opposite of what real books do. In the 1990s, an accounting professor named Mark Negrini took Benford's forgotten rule and aimed it straight at fraud. He showed that if you take a real company's ledgers and count up the leading digits, they tumble into that same lopsided curve. 1s everywhere, 9s rare. But cooked books come out suspiciously flat. Too even, too fair. Now, tax investigators and forensic accountants run this exact test. They don't even need to understand your scheme. They just count first digits and look for the curve that should be there and isn't. It won't convict you on its own. It's a smoke alarm, not a verdict. But it tells them precisely which pile of numbers to pull apart. And that pile is almost always the one somebody built by hand. So here's the plain answer to where we started. You can fake a number. You can fake 100 of them. But you can't fake the shape they make together, because that shape was never yours to begin with. It comes from the way the real world grows, by multiplying, again and again, until the digit 1 ends up parked at the front of almost everything. Newcomb saw it in the dirt on a page. Benford saw it in 20,000 scattered facts. And a forger sees it far too late. The moment someone counts the first digits of their careful, even invented little numbers, and the fingerprint just isn't there. The one number you never think about is the first one. And it's the one that gives you away.